you were going to try to write an application where you're going to try to collect stock updates for a selection of stocks, and you wanted to do that with AJAX. The first question you'd have to ask yourself, what is the polling interval that you want to interrogate this server for stock prices? Now, the problem with that is that whatever the interval is that you specify, there's bound to be events that will take place in between that interval polling time, and you're going to miss those events. And the other side of the equation is that if the stock, say, isn't moving much at all, and you end up polling it frequently and not get any valid data back, it's going to be a lot of overhead to do that. Well, WebSockets addresses both of that. It's event-driven from both the client and the server, so the data exchange can go both ways. An AJAX architecture would require a TCP connection for each one of those requests, and that's a lot of overhead. The WebSocket, on the other hand, once the TCP connection is made, you have that virtual tunnel, and as little as one little piece of data, like a stock price, can travel across very efficiently. From a performance standpoint, WebSockets are take 1/10 of the time as REST. So that's a lot of motivation right there. So the first thing I'm going to do is show an example. And there'll be a number of repos that I have at my account, tgregoneil at GitHub. And the first one is just super simple WS. I thought it would do just the basic bare elements that it would take to describe what it takes to make a WebSocket connection. Now, the server uses the NPM package called WS, super popular for handling WebSockets. The browser already has, every modern browser already has WebSocket capability as a JavaScript call. So if you decide you want to clone this, then you would first install WS, and then run node on the server, and then that gets the server busy waiting, listening for a connection. So the code, let me just move this. The code for the server, and this is the entirety of it, we require WS, and then we invoke the server function of the WS object, and pick our favorite port, whatever we want to use, and that's what we're going to listen on. And then we define callbacks for these events, a connection event, and then for a connection event that stays open, any message that comes across. And for a simple little example, all we're going to do is report that to console.log. And then once the connection opens, we're going to say hello from the server. The client side looks as simple as this. It's basically going to open a WebSocket, and the protocol is WS : ... and then the domain and the port. And then we're going to define our callback for a message that comes in. How do we want to handle that? In this case, we're going to write the data to the body, whatever that is, and then we're going to send a message to the server. So, and the result looks something like this. And so, see that in action. We're going to start the server. And then I'm going to grab that URL, which essentially just points to the client index file. And there's our hello from server. And so we go back, and just to show, we got hello from client. So we got a connection back and forth. Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit more interesting example. We're going to show you a chat server. A chat server is a perfect example for WebSocket, because you wouldn't want to try to build a chat server by polling, are there any messages to be broadcast? You would simply want to have whatever messages show up from someone automatically go out to everybody. So this is another repo that I have, and all the example is there. And this is an NPM package, so you can install it on your local environment if you want to see it. You would cd the server, and then start the server, and then browse to client index file. The message structure that underlines it is basically object-oriented, in that there's a primary key defined, and then any other keys would be treated as secondary attributes that may want to modify the context of the message. All the messages are stringified before going out, so only strings go out, and then when they come back, they're parsed. And then basically you just handle each one of the commands. So as an example, the client may, to initiate a chat session, say, my name is investor, and I want to ask this question, and possibly I might want to make that urgent. Now, this example doesn't actually use urgency. I'm just putting there to illustrate a secondary attribute. So here's what the architecture of the chat server looks like. The first thing that the browser is going to present is a form, and it's going to give an opportunity to present or to enter in a name. And then, so once that happens, then new WebSocket is going to be kicked off, just like we saw. And that's going to kick off some information to the server, namely that connections wants to be established. And the server is going to acknowledge that with a get user message back. And then, so then the client, which is holding on to the name investor, is going to send that out. Now, just because of the possibility that somebody else may already be named investor, what the server is going to do is possibly modify that with a suffix 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just to ensure that each username is unique. Okay, so it's going to say set user, and it possibly may have the suffix modifying it. And anytime a connection happens, the entire message history so far for the chat operation will be presented. So if, for example, the investor says, "Where are my Bitcoins?" the browser is going to package that up as an object with primary key chat message. The server is going to receive that, and it's going to echo to all the users, so basically broadcast to all the users whatever that message was, and it's going to say, and here's our secondary attribute, what the name of the user is, so that we can see who's asking the question. So the code details in the server, there are two, these are the two primary keys, user 0 or chat message. The user 0 for when the initial connection takes place. And when that comes in, again, we have the unique, here I'm pointing, thinking that you're going to see my finger, Heather. Well, look at that. That's a little better. All right. So unique user is going to be invoked to, again, possibly put on a suffix if it's necessary, and then broadcast to everyone that this user has joined the session. And then it's going to send to the client whatever the possible modified username is and the message history. And from then on, the server is just going to listen to chat messages. And when it sees that a message comes in that's a chat message from a user that's already joined the conversation, it's simply going to broadcast that. And the broadcast function will then also accumulate that message in the message history, so that when future people join, they'll see the updated message history. This is a little busy. On the browser rendering, it makes use of another package that's at the repo, go-j2h, which basically takes object-oriented representation, and then when you invoke J2H, it basically produces the equivalent HTML form, the HTML data. And so each one of these objects has a primary key, that being the element tag, and then optional attributes like class and so forth. Now, then that kind of begs the question, okay, what happens if there's one of these keys that is both a primary and a secondary key? And in HTML, there exists a case of that, style. Style can be a primary key in the head, and it can also be a secondary attribute modifying primary attributes. So what J2H uses is another package, go-msg, that sorts that out. So basically, if there are multiple primary keys present, and say, for example, if style was present and another primary key, if there was another primary key, it would know that style is the secondary. So it just has a little bit of code to sort that out. Okay, so another thing I want to point out is that in the form, the ID is going to be, I'm going to want to say what that is, because then after this gets rendered, I'm going to create these submit callback, which is going to pick up the username. And this is going to be basically a jQuery call to ID username. And we can see in the input field here, it has ID username. The distinction with the capital I here, you may notice that, and this is a small I. This is actually the raw form of the ID. Like in this case, the ID called user. And what the capital I is, it's just a convention I use. It has the pound sign in front of it, because when you use jQuery to select an ID, it has to have the pound sign in front of it. So that's the subtle distinction with that. So after it picks up the username, then again, it invokes the WebSocket function, and it starts to initiate the transfer to the server. So that's the code on either side. Now let's talk about how to make WebSockets secure, because everybody obviously wants secure communication nowadays. If you don't already have a certificate of authority for your website, I encourage you to consider Let's Encrypt. It's free, and you can start a cron job, and every 90 days it can renew that certificate. So you essentially can get a free certificate of authority indefinitely for your website. And what Let's Encrypt will do is, for the details, it'll steer you over to certbot. And in my case, I have an AWS server that's hosting Ubuntu 16.04, and it says, okay, these are what you need to do. These are the instructions you need to do, the apt-get basically commands, so that you can install, first off, make a new repository, and then install the certbot software. And then you simply invoke it, certbot -- Apache, and there'll be a number of questions that you can answer. And in particular, the last question is, do you want to have HTTP requests automatically get mapped to HTTPS? Now, if you're in development mode, so maybe you want to test just HTTP, and so you can say no, and you can always go back and change that later. But the beauty is, if you do say yes, it takes care of all the mod rewrite and all the other details in etc/Apache, Apache.com file that's there, so that you don't have to, futz around with that. Then, once those keys are created, the SSL certs directory of the server directory, if you do an npm install, you'll find that these two files are basically empty placeholders. So for your domain, you would grab those two keys that got created from Let's Encrypt and put those there. Code that now handles the secure transaction. First off, you would start the server, now node chat server, and use the -- secure option. So now it knows that v.isSecure is going to be true. And so it's going to want to go grab those keys, it's going to read those files, and then it's going to build a credentials object, and it's going to start an HTTPS server. I have require HTTPS, so it's going to be able to do that. And then it's going to say listen on our port, whichever one we've decided we want to use. And then it's going to call the WS server function, only in this case with an object that has a server key instead of just a port key. So that's how WS is going to know this is a secure representation as opposed to unsecure. Of it is going to look something like this. It's going to grab the URL, and it's going to parse that URL to determine if it's HTTP or HTTPS. That's how the browser is going to know. And so it looks at this regular expression, and so as a reminder, I guess this question mark applies to just the S. So if it's going to match this, HTTP has to be present, and then optionally an S, colon, and then it would be // Now, since we know it's going to be // I went ahead and put dots there because regular expression dot matches any character, and I already know it's going to be // This is just a little easier on the eyes to look at than what would be like an escaped slash, like what I have here. Okay, so and then so this is going to get captured, and then this is going to get captured. And what we have here is a character class, and we have one or more characters, plus sign here. And here we have to escape a /. Normally in regular expressions, you've got the dirty dozen characters are the only ones that you would need to escape if you want to represent them literally. So that would be the curly brace, the parentheses, and so forth. But it turns out you would also need the slash because it marks the end of the regular expression. So we don't want to confuse JavaScript that this is really the end of the expression. So you have to escape that as well. Okay, so in this character class, we have a caret, meaning any character except for the /, and we want one or more of those. So basically, as an example, mongoscout.com is going to pick up all these characters from this M to this M, and it's going to stop at this / because this says get everything except for a /. So that's how it knows it's going to match that part of the domain right there. So once it's matched, it's going to set is it HTTPS accordingly. In other words, is that really an S or not? It's going to pick up the domain, and then it's going to build this prefix. And if it is HTTPS, now you want to use WSS protocol as opposed to WS. And so the URL that we're going to build is going to have this prefix : / and then the domain : and then the port, and then we're going to submit that to WebSocket. And now we can communicate. So if you want, let's just try this out. Maybe see if we can crash the server or something. If you want to navigate to mongoscout.com, and you can type in go-chat if you want to, or you can just put mongoscout.com. It's my domain, and I went ahead and for the purpose of tonight, that's all you have to type in. So let me go to the browser and bring that up. Okay, so I'll put a username. We'll call it Sparky. Okay, and we'll see a conversation's already joined. So if somebody else wants to try this, oh, see, we're getting some people joining in. All right. All right, somebody with script trying to mess me up here with some JavaScript. So that's how you know a hacker's in there trying to punk me or something like that. When I first learned PHP, I had all this PHP stuff coming in until I learned how to make sure that was only a string. So WebSockets are very efficiently spinning this back and forth, as you could see. And if you want to open multiple browsers, you could do that. And every time you join, you're going to get the entire history. Now, one little trick that keeps this at the bottom here, that's kind of fun, is let me go back to assuming I picked the right one. Okay, there we go. GoChat.js. The rendering that keeps that at the bottom, when I Googled how to keep the window at the bottom, Stack Overflow had a lot of great suggestions on how you have to do some math and calculate the window and so forth. And then this one answer was beautiful. It said, part here. To scroll to an arbitrarily large number. Oh, there it is. Okay, so scroll top. So basically, with jQuery, I invoke scroll top, and then the Stack Overflow answers were saying, about doing all this calculation to make sure that it would keep the last information to your scroll window at the bottom. But then this next answer said, just use 1E10. You're probably never going to exceed a number that big, and voila. And jQuery says, okay, well, if it's greater than what it needs to be, no problem. We'll just chop it off. And so it was a real simple solution. So I love that. Okay, so where are we now? Okay, so that's the slideshow or the chat server. Another example is most people that are doing node development applications are going to want to use some kind of database. And MongoDB is an excellent database because number one, it's also JavaScript-like or JSON-like. So you basically, as opposed to say like MySQL or something like that. And so I've been taking University of MongoDB courses, and this one M102 for database administrators was excellent. And so if you were to navigate over to where the slideshow is at my repo and click there, what would come up is that real quick. Course basically slides. Okay, and it uses WebSockets, so that's why it's sort of relevant to this. So it uses WebSockets to present all those slides. And so what you have here is I took screenshots, so you can kind of navigate around through the arrows here. You can also use keyboard shortcuts. If you hover over the help, it'll pop up a reminder of what are all the functions for. And so you can navigate over to any topic and then navigate around to all the different, you can see all the quizzes, what's there. And if you want to listen to the video, you can just hit video, and now it'll go grab that YouTube video, and you can watch the entire video. So you can take the entire course with this thing here if you wanted to. So, so you can't hear sound, but you can see it moving along. And then anytime you decide you're done with that, you can go back. So, okay, so parting thoughts. Always drink green smoothies every day. They're good for you. And blend them, don't juice them, they're better. Index-based mutual funds are way better investment than actively managed funds for the average investor. They outperform 75 to 80% of their counterparts on a regular basis. And finally, long-lived Bootstrap and jQuery. All this React development has my head in a spin, but Bootstrap and jQuery is fundamentally really cool. So stick with that. Thank you.